bringing joy to us this morning. Dahlia, as I mentioned earlier, we read earlier in Hallel, verses that celebrate this Rosh Chodesh. We read Pitu li Sharei Tzedek, open for me gates of righteousness, gates of justice. Of course, if not all are included and able to enter through those gates, they cannot be gates of justice or of righteousness. We focus on that on this particular Shabbat morning as we have with us a special guest, Rafi Forbush. Rafi, some of you know from his many years teaching at the Highlands Minneapolis Jewish Day School, serving as a coach among other things, and currently serving as the youth director of Beth Jacob Synagogue. But we bring him this morning because he's recently founded with a number of other supporters a new institution in our Jewish community called the Multiracial Jewish Network of Minnesota. And it's challenging all of us to open our minds and our hearts and our understanding and to truly open the gates, to open the doors of the Jewish community to recognizing Jews of color who for too long have not felt welcome, have not walked through those doors, or if they have, they haven't felt seen. And so we're delighted to have Rafi with us this morning to share his own personal experience growing up in our Jewish community and his vision for what our Jewish community can become, one in which those doors of righteousness will be open to all.
Thanks, Rabbi Davis. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, Shabbat Shalom. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces of, parents of students that I've taught, former students, current students, colleagues, friends, family. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rafi Forbush. And as Rabbi Davis said, for almost 20 years now, I've been an entrepreneur, coach, and mentor to Jewish youth through sports. And I'm also the youth director at Beth Jacob. And I'm also a physical education teacher at the Highlands Minneapolis Jewish Day School. This past year, I've also become the founder and executive director of the Multiracial Jewish Association of Minnesota. Before I start, I want to take a special second to thank Rabbi Davis for inviting me to share my thoughts about the Parsha this week. And I would like to thank each and every one of you at home for giving me a few minutes of your time on this very cold Shabbat morning. In the last few Parsha, we have been shown God's might and tenacity to lead us to our freedom. We've witnessed the 10 plagues, the splitting of the Red Sea, the victory over the Amalekites in battle, and the gift of manna during our journey through the desert. In this week's Parashah, Mishpatim, God continues to support our people by sharing some of our most basic laws and commandments. There are many important tenets and rules shared, but there is one rule that I'd like to concentrate on this morning. And we didn't read it out loud, but in Exodus chapter 22, verse 20, it says, "You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were slaves in the land of Egypt." The same principle is echoed just a few verses later in Exodus chapter 23, verse 9. "You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt." This commandment is so important that it's repeated twice. When looking at the Parsha, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs asks, why is remembering our heritage so fundamental to the Jewish people, particularly in whether or not our laws are able to guide us towards ethics and compassion? Over the last 8 months, I have seen our local Jewish community become even more focused on being inclusive and welcoming. As someone who grew up in the Twin Cities Jewish community, I feel that that is one of our collective strengths. But can a committee or a set of guidelines truly create a sense of belonging? As Jews, we are often in the minority as we move throughout the world. Some of us feel it in our neighborhoods. Some of us feel it in our professional lives, in our social circles, or even our educational and extracurricular experiences. I know because I've been there. We all know what it's like to walk into an unfamiliar place and to be the one and only, or the one of very few. It's uncomfortable, can be awkward, and sometimes it means that we can be subject to rude or negative comments and even direct anti-Semitism. But then there are times, like when we gather at Shabbat services or for a holiday with extended family and friends, where we expect we can just be, where we don't have to explain our kippot or feel questioning eyes or judgmental questions. For many Jews of color, that feeling of freedom and security is missing even within our Jewish spaces. What is supposed to be a familiar place can be uncomfortable. Imagine, even on Shabbat, as part of a morning minyan, Jews of color can be subject to negative comments, microaggressions, or even outright racism. I know because I've been there too. Even as someone who has spent my entire life as an active and engaged member of our community. Even as a Jewish day school student and insulated within the Jewish community, myself, I experienced hatred as I grew older, and so did my parents. People at camp started calling me the Ethiopian Jew. At the time, I couldn't have even identified Ethiopia on a map. I went to a neighboring shul where I was called the N-word. And as I started to explore clothing styles that I saw on people who looked like me, someone from our community, a parent, thought it would be appropriate, or maybe humorous, to tell me that they liked my costume. I'm not sure I would have gotten that comment had I grown payas, worn tzitzit, and a kippah. All within the supposed safety of my own community, our community. I have been humiliated, isolated, degraded, and made to feel like there is no place for me. It makes sense why I don't see many others who look like me in the synagogue or Jewish programs after a certain age. The Torah tells us how we must treat strangers, but what about the people that aren't strangers, but continually get treated as if they are? And even so, those rules seem to be the exception for Jews of color, because it's mapped out of how we're supposed to treat the stranger. Since 2014, I have been speaking publicly to bring awareness to the intersection between being Jewish and a person of color, and how there is little to no space for me to be both. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I was watching and listening to the reaction of the people close to me, to fellow community members, and to community leaders. Outreach and support to the Black community is great, and trust me, I believe that our community effort is important. But in our community's effort to reach out, we missed something very deep within. As I reached out to other Jews of color, they expressed a deep pain. They felt as if they were going through this moment alone. We were grieving, but felt no support from the people closest to us in our community or the leadership we listened to each week. In essence, we had Jews sitting Shiva, all alone, grappling with their intersectional identities as Jews and as people of color. Still, no safe place to be both. And all of a sudden I realized I'm not alone. The Minneapolis Federation recently released a population study in partnership with Brandeis University that revealed 7% of Jewish households in Minnesota include a person of color, Black, Hispanic, or Latino origin. That means there are potentially over 1,500 Jews in Minnesota who identify as people of color. Can you imagine that? That's enough humans to fill the Beth El Sanctuary. Oh, I'm not done. And the social hall, just as you would for the high holidays, with an overflow of people waiting to attend. But when it comes to the number of Jews of color who are active within the community or affiliated with a synagogue, the picture becomes much smaller. We would be lucky to fill the front row. And in your defense, Bethel, you have a very long front row, so I got to give that part to you. In this study, Jews of color and their families shared their struggles in finding a welcoming place, including sharing their story and perspective in their words. One survey respondent said, "My 3 children are Jews of color. I often feel that talking about racism that they have experienced within the Jewish community is not welcome." Another person said, "I would like to see more diversity within my current Jewish community. It would be nice if they could be more welcoming to other people that may not look like them or have the same background." Again, resonates with me. After reading these quotes, I began reaching out and speaking to other Jews of color that I may not have known as well, or maybe a little bit more distant, or friend of a friend. I heard similar stories of pain and exclusion, and for some, I heard the story of the moment many decided to walk away from our community. At that moment, I knew something needed to be done. So over the past several months, my focus has been on bringing local Jews of color and multiracial families together to build community with hopes of strengthening our connection with each other and the broader Jewish community. We're still in the early phases of building. We have already created powerful connections across local and regional communities, and we continue to do work every single day. Today, we have a group of local Jews of color who are working to advance their role and voice by building an empowered organization focused on 3 pillars: community, education, and advocacy, in order to uplift the multiracial Jewish community of Minnesota and to center non-white Jewish identity within our organizations and institutions, and to enrich our local Jewish community overall. The Multiracial Jewish Association of Minnesota, or MJA, has brought together nearly 45 local Jews of color, their spouses, families, over the last few months. And if you've heard me speak in the last couple of months, you know that that number has increased considerably since the last time I even spoke. MJA is working to grow into a long-standing institution that can provide change for our children and our children's children. I think each of us can grow and help prepare the world by serving as leaders. We can do better. We must do better. And it starts with recognizing our collective responsibility in the system we have, and our collective power in transforming it into something better, without judgment of ourselves or each other. As Jews, if we are asked for help from those in need, we are told that we must assist in any way that we can. I am here today asking for your help. We are not all the same. And this is not a black and white issue. This now is a Jewish issue. This effort is for the rainbow of people that make our community, with a focus on bringing in those who feel left out. The people who are family, but feel like strangers. Because as we read today, you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. Again, Exodus chapter 23, verse 9. In Bashalach, a couple weeks ago, God commanded us to tell our story because we were once slaves in Egypt. We must immerse ourselves in the battles and obstacles that stand in the way of freedom, and retell the story as if we are still slaves. But are we obligated to retell our story so that we dwell on our history as slaves? Or is it commanded so that we remember how far we've come as a people, so that we can consciously continue our journey through the desert toward the promised land? It's a long journey. We have a lot to learn. We don't yet know where we're headed, but we know where we're headed is a much better place than we are now. If we keep our chins up, as it's commanded to us by God, God will guide us to the promised land. But the question is, how do we get there? My answer, through education and relationships. But this morning, I want to concentrate on education. Because unless it is repaired, it will be repeated. Let me say that again. Because unless it is repaired, it will be repeated. And we cannot begin to work toward a solution until we truly understand how our fellow Jews are being impacted. We must immerse ourselves in the difficult and uncomfortable conversations and take the time to overcome the obstacles. There will be leaders, followers, and community members who question the purpose of our journey. Is it easy? Would it be easier to just stick to what we know, to stay as slaves, or allow others to be held captive mentally or emotionally? Maybe. But where we are headed is a much better place for all Jews. The idea behind this topic is not to move the tent so someone else is excluded. Instead, our goal is to extend the tent to include every Jew asking for help, support, or even something as simple as recognition. The Torah tells us that we were slaves for 430 years. If we measure a generation as 20 years, then we were enslaved for more than 18 generations. Take a moment to think about what that means. 18 times for a child to be born, grow up, and start having children of their own before we would start to know freedom again. This is no different than the struggle of racial equality in our country. We escaped the land where we were enslaved. After slavery was abolished in the United States, it was replaced with systems that oppressed the bodies and minds of people of color. And trust me, in so many ways, it's still happening today. In my conversations, I've joined about how we can move forward with our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I hear frustration that more hasn't been done in the last 9 months. It seems as if the further from slavery we get as Jewish people, the more we tend to take the long pursuit of freedom for granted. We were slaves for more than 18 generations. It's going to take more than a few months. It's going to take more than a few years even for us to reach the promised land. We might not move the needle as much as we want and as quickly as we want, but any teacher will tell you, education takes time. So immerse yourself in the story of our journey to freedom as an enlightening experience. Feel it in your body, your mind, and feel it in your heart. Today, we may be slaves to our work, our debts, our possessions, technology, illness, mental health, systemic pressures and inequalities, and much more. All things that may restrict us from what we know is our potential. And that's just on a personal level. Put yourself in the shoes of those who are slaves. Use your Seder table this year as a new opportunity to bring perspective to the ideas of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Not just for the communities around you, but for the Jews of color, their families, their children, and their children's children who are sitting at their own Seder tables. We must do the work so that we can lead by example for the next generation to demonstrate the love and inclusivity that we would like to see in the future. Each year during Passover, we're commanded to eat unleavened bread. And during Yom Kippur, we come together to atone for our sins, not focusing on what I have done, but what we have done. Let us do the same in this conversation. Put aside what you have done or haven't done, and let's begin on focusing on what we can achieve together. Through education, empathy, and shared experience, let us celebrate the rainbow that makes up the Minnesota Jewish community so that we can all dance in the tent together. Let's move forward with hope and purpose, not because we have done something wrong, but because we have this new opportunity to do it even more right. The journey is long, but each small step is progress. One day we'll look back and say, wow, look how far we've come. That is my dream. And until that dream becomes a reality, as long as we work together and we keep our chins pointed to God, I trust that God will show us the way. From my heart to yours, Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach, Rafi, thank you so much.